Hi everybody, welcome to this first seminar for 2022 in our series Data Science in the News, convened by the QUT Centre for Data Science. So I'm Kerrie Mengersen, Distinguished Professor of Statistics and Director at the Centre for Data Science, and I'm your moderator for today. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owner of the land where QUT now stands, and also acknowledge the traditional custodians of country from where you're joining us today. I pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. So data science and AI are the dominant tools of the 21st century. Data and the use of data are at the top of mind for almost every enterprise in the world: governments, businesses, societies, universities, and researchers. Where were you about 20 years ago? In 2003, Nick Carr declared in the Harvard Business Review that IT doesn't matter. Well, how things have changed. Data science continues to be one of the most fast-moving fields, with new trends emerging each year. So it's fitting that we kick off our Data Science in the News series this year with a reflection on the trends in data science and AI for 2022. Bernard Marr, a world-renowned futurist and business thought leader, has predicted that in 2022, the focus will be on augmented workforce, bigger and better language modelling, AI in cybersecurity, AI in the metaverse, low code and no code AI, autonomous vehicles, and creative AI. In a recent data science blogathon held by Analytics Video, the top 10 trends for 2022 were identified: cloud-based AI and data solutions, low code and no code technology, more rules and regulations, focus on actionable data and insights, augmented data analytics, auto machine learning, edge intelligence, improved natural language processing, automated data cleaning, and blockchain in data science. It's going to be a busy year. But today, we're going to ask 4 of our own experts in QUT and the Centre for Data Science about what they see as the emerging trends in this area. We'd also like to learn what you think as the audience is the dominant data science and AI trend for 2022. Put your answer in the Q&A or the chat as we listen to our speakers for today. So I'm going to introduce our panel. We have, and I'd like our panel members just to raise your hand at this stage, Professor Will Browne from the ARM Hub at QUT School of Electrical Engineering and Robotics. We have Associate Professor Alice Payne from the School of Design at QUT. We have Associate Professor Grant Hamilton from the QUT School of Biology and Environmental Science, and Professor Richi Nayak from the QUT School of Computer Science. You can see the great spread that we have across different domains that are all involved in this area of data and data science from different perspectives. And we're going to ask each of these panel members in turn to speak to the topic for 5 minutes or so, and we'll follow this with a group discussion. So if you have some questions for the panel members, please put them in the chat, and time permitting, we can include these in the discussion at the end. So Will, let's start with you. So with over 27 years of experience in AI and robotics, and as Professor and Chair of Manufacturing Robotics, I bet that you've seen enormous change in data science and AI over the years. So I'm going to hand over to you to talk about 3 data science and AI tools in advanced robotics and manufacturing, and the need to become more collaborative and effective. Over to you, Will.
Thank you, Kerrie, and thank you all for turning up and listening to these fascinating topics. So the ARM Hub is based out in Northgate, and it links industry with manufacturing. And manufacturing is really embracing AI and data science. And these are the 3 trends that we're seeing: the ones that are happening now, the ones that are going to happen at the end of the year, and the one that at the end is a bit more futuristic. So the first trend that we're interested in is the tools to take manufacturing and robotics away from the assembly lines, such as the car plants, to things like banana dehandling, where you've got unstructured, noisy, different types of domains that require greater levels of AI and intelligence than fixed systems that we're using at the moment. So the research is how we take difficult, awkward tasks and make them amenable through data science and AI. And the first trend is looking at digital twins. So it's looking at how you take the real world and take it from out there inside a computer, and how we can make models and how we can reason about these models. And it's looking at how we capture the data in a sensible, meaningful way and how we capture it quickly. How we look at what's the essential features. You can't capture everything in the world. It's just too big, too monolithic. How do we capture just the essential parts of the problem? Then once you've got this digital twin, how do we use AI on it to optimize the process? How do we try out things, the what if scenarios, the counterfactuals, the things that we couldn't possibly do in real life because it might blow up the plant? And what we want to do is not risk the plant. And when we're talking about bananas, we mean the actual plant, but we also talk about the plants in terms like steel mills. So what we want to do is use our digital twins to make advances without threatening our own existing plant, and we add value. And I've got a transformation center that's being proposed. So if people are interested in digital twins, please flick me an email. The next trend is explainable AI. So at the moment, AI is great. It can do things like recognize a cat versus a dog, or it can recognize an unripe banana versus a ripe banana. But why does it recognize a banana to be ripe? Why does it recognize a part of a car that isn't in the right place? Can it tell you whether it's successful or not? And a lot of deep neural networks, you need to do an awful lot of post-processes and ad hoc analysis to understand it. And one of the trends at the moment is to be able to explain and look under the hood of AI, so that the human operator can understand why it's recommending you reject this product. It can understand what it needs to change in order to succeed. So if you go into a bank and you're denied a loan, the AI can tell you, well, if you stop buying 10 coffees a day, your productivity may go down, but you'll actually be able to afford this home loan. And therefore, we want to be able to work out what is happening. And why is an AI erred? We've got a lot more autonomous driving. So unfortunately, if a car has an accident, can the car tell you why it had the accident? Was it that the chicken was crossing the road and it swerved to stop the chicken being injured? Why is the AI behaving as it is? And we see this as being a huge trend in the future of having AI in industry, in everyday life, but it needs to be able to explain it. And that's also being driven by legislation. A lot of European legislation has a right to explanation on decision making. So if you're using AI as part of your business and you're dealing with Europe, you need to have explainable AI in it. So not only is there moral grounds for it, there's also now legal grounds where explainable AI is going to be a huge trend this year. And the final one is looking at futuristic. And it's looking at abstract reasoning. As I said, the world is very diverse, it's very complex. And if you're trying to de-hand a banana, it's really uncertain. Each hand of banana is different. And how do you program a robot to do this? Well, we're hoping that AI through abstract reasoning will be able to do this. Now, if I give you an example of abstract reasoning, human beings are very good at abstract reasoning. We can look at this pattern and go, I see a trend in here. We look at another pattern and say, okay, I'm starting to build up a pattern of what I am seeing. So the left-hand image goes to the right-hand image. And we look at the next one, okay, I can see this trending. And therefore, when we get the next image and we go question mark, most people would be able to fill in that square and have a good idea what that image should look at. If you're trying to do something like that with a deep neural network, it doesn't have a clue. It's programmed to recognize patterns. It's not programmed to abstract. And therefore it goes, don't know how to do this. We need a different form of AI. We need more symbolic reasoning, more higher level, hierarchical, abstract reasoning. And why is that important? Well, let's say a robot's trying to pick up a wine glass on the edge of a table. Instantly, you'll know, well, if it pushes it, the wine glass is going to fall off the table. If it grips too hard, it's going to break the wine stem. And we can abstract out these things. And what we need future robotics to be able to do is use AI and data science to abstract out our reasoning. And thank you so much for your 5 minutes. I'll take the questions and answers at the end in the group discussion, and I shall hand you back to Kerrie. Thank you all.
Oh, thank you so much, Will. That was really, really interesting and inspiring. I'm looking forward to this year to see all those things start to come to fruition. Our next panellist comes from a very different field. So Dr. Alice Payne is an associate professor in fashion in the School of Design, and is a program leader in the Centre for a Waste-Free World, co-leader of a group on future textile industries, and an award-winning designer in her own right. I'm very keen to learn how data science and AI will touch her world in 2022. And just as an aside, my sister works in the fashion world, and when I talk about fitting models, she says, well, Kerrie, that means a whole other thing to me. So over to you, Alice, to tell us about digitising a material world, problems, promises, and prospects for global fashion systems.
Oh, thanks so much, Kerrie. Thanks, everyone. Lovely to be here. Yes, so I don't come from a data science background. I'm a fashion designer by background. And now as a researcher, I'm a qualitative researcher looking in depth at how supply chains function. So I'll talk about 3 key trends today as I see them. And I also want to kind of flag that I'm coming to this topic with a critique as well, in that I'm looking for innovations that can actually help make a system better for people and better for the living world. So the first is one that's getting a lot of ground, and we're seeing a lot of traction here around fashion that is only ever in the digital realm, fashion born completely digital, whether it's digital influencers with their own Instagram accounts and the like, whether it's garments designed only ever for the metaverse, and luxury brands creating product purely for the metaverse. So this is something we're only going to see more and more traction in as time goes on. It's one that is interesting, but there's ones that are close to my heart, so I'll press on with the second. The second one is where we're seeing behind the scenes immense change in how fashion comes to us. So in the past, we had qualitative trend analysis where people who, I guess, understood consumer tastes would design the trends for the next season. For the last few years, we're seeing this immense harvesting of all the data in social media, in retail spaces and the like, online, every click being fed into data analytics, tracking billions of stock keeping units, and being sold and packaged to retailers to help them make better decisions and respond to consumer desire faster than ever. We're seeing algorithms that are now designing clothing where they can take 30 trillion different kinds of clothing examples and then somehow synthesize them into the 9 examples they feel the consumer will be most attracted to. So as a fashion designer, that is also very far from my reality, but you can see this is how businesses are making decisions faster than ever. The trend that is dearest to my heart, though, is despite all this digitizing in the metaverse, fashion is a material thing in a material world, if I can misquote Madonna. And when we think about, I work with cotton growers all the way through to people processing waste fabric. And I'm very interested in the opportunity for data science to make these supply chains better for people, fairer, more transparent, and more ethical. And that's where I see the biggest trend of 2022. So to give you a bit of a taste of how this might work, if you imagine cotton grown, shipped to spinners in multiple regions, knitted into fabric, made into garments, sold to brands and retailers, at every point you've got these multiple touch points. In some cases, it's paper certificates passed along a chain of custody. Other times it's digitized and increasingly becoming more and more packaged up and more sophisticated systems. We're still thinking though about cotton growers who might be smallholders in India versus, you know, massive cotton growers in Australia with very different data capabilities. Then we have multiple complexities coming in on this, as you have multiple fibers from multiple regions coming together, all with a whole heap of social and environmental challenges. So we have brands and retailers faced with the prospect that they might have 30,000 touch points on their supply chain, and they have to somehow capture that and measure it and report to governments, to consumers, to NGOs, to the myriad of multi-stakeholder initiatives that are saying, how is your water being treated? What's your carbon footprint? So the tools that are very interesting that are emerging are ones like, obviously, traceability, where you have applied DNA or inherent characteristics of the fibre that's tracked throughout the whole supply chain. All of these systems work slightly differently. They're all competing, as you can imagine. And so you have extra layers of complexity coming to bear. The one that is perhaps one of the most exciting to me is the possibilities of open access for increased transparency. So a tool like the Open Apparel Registry, it gives a unique identifier to thousands upon thousands of factories worldwide, scraping this data from the publicly available lists of brands and retailers and where they produce. That immediately is an enabler for increased transparency, I should say. So we are going to have more visibility of where things are made and more light shone on a very opaque and problematic industry. So that's the production side of material flows, but it gets more complicated again, just to throw some more spanners in an increasingly complicated system. So in my work, I don't just look at the supply chain from fibre, I look at the whole life cycle of the garment, including how the garments pass from brands and retailers through to wearers and their decision making, and then through to how those garments can be reused or recycled. Just as brands and retailers are being asked to do their due diligence upstream, increasingly they're being asked, do your due diligence downstream. Take responsibility for where your products, not only where they came from, but where they're going. And so this presents some also very interesting challenges for data science. So a few here, again, the traceability all the way through. It can't just stop here, it has to go all the way through so you can identify fibers end of life. We have wardrobe apps that help people make better decisions about what they already own, so they don't need to buy more. And we also have a whole heap of interesting things happening in how we might better automate the sorting procedures for garments and the like. I suppose the main trends we do see in terms of the way with the metaverse and so on, and the digitization of fashion, my feeling is we need to, data science, the opportunity here is to use it to actually make the system more transparent and better for people and so on. However, what we're seeing is there's so many competing systems and products and approaches to do this that it's a very difficult landscape for brands and retailers at all scales to navigate. And as I talk to people throughout the whole supply chain, we're just seeing more and more confusion and, I guess, concern about what this will mean for people in their practices. So I suppose I have a question for the people on the call today, all of whom will be far more au fait with the opportunities of data science than me. And I would ask you, how can these technologies be designed that they are not just in service to a system moving faster and faster, because that's what the trend forecasting has been used for in data science, just producing more and more stuff. Rather, how can data science be used for good, for an ethical, slower system, one that puts the living world first? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alice. Great challenging questions and a really interesting insight into your domain. Our third panel member is Professor Grant Hamilton. So Grant is a world leader in innovative ecological science, using drones and other new technology, artificial intelligence and advanced analytics, and really at the smart use, the edge of the smart use of leading edge technology for efficient and accurate wildlife monitoring. So Grant, biodiversity is in crisis. Can AI help?
I'm glad you introduced it that way, because I come not with solutions, but with problems. And my first problem is that I'm at the end of my presentation instead of the beginning. We shall be there in a second. Yeah. So you will all know quite likely that the Australian government has officially listed the koala as endangered. That happened a little while ago. It's awful. It's wonderful that it's been recognised. But this is the thin edge. If we can't even save koalas, what can we do? You know, that's a pretty tragic indictment of the way we're going, and picking up Alice's point about preserving the natural world. What we need to do is preserve habitat, reduce threatening processes, and that includes things like invasive species and weeds. Now, there's no doubt that for species like koalas, the first thing is to stop chopping down their homes, but there is absolutely no doubt that monitoring is part of the solution. We have a huge issue. Australia is vast, and there are vast areas all over the world that need to be monitored. So how do we scale, and how do we scale efficiently? I will just note, this popped up in The Guardian last night, that listing something as endangered doesn't solve the problem. Even everything that has already been listed isn't being managed well because it is not being monitored. And that comes out of the Australian National Audit Office, so we presume that it's right. So the first way that we can think about scaling is with technology. And one of the ways, of course, would be to use drones. Of course, I'm going to say something like that. But traditionally, what we do is have boots on the ground. Drones can cover large areas quickly, and not just quickly, but at a resolution which is effective. And so really, the idea here is, how do we use data analytics that can work with the technology to cover large areas? In covering those large areas, collecting a lot of data, this is where artificial intelligence comes in. This is a combination of algorithms that Simon Denman put together. It was refined by Evangeline Corcoran, who's now working at the Turing Institute in London. And we led the worldwide first accurate survey of koalas using drones. And we're continuing to improve that with ensemble modelling. I guess one of the things that I would say is, when I look at trends at the leading edge of data analytics or AI, frankly, we're happy to be 3 steps behind, as long as it's useful and it can be put into the field. We're not only looking at getting things up into the air, we're thinking about how can we use imaging on the ground, how can we use automated detection. We're working with the Tasmanian government, with local government authorities, and the Queensland state government as well, looking at invasive species. So refining, getting more accurate with these kinds of approaches is really important for us. And in these detection methodologies, increasing the true positives and decreasing the abundance of false positives is going to be a huge thing that we need to achieve. The big one that's that Alice alluded to, though, is really people. And when I look at the heart of, what explainable AI is, and when fundamentally I look at what we need in conservation, it's people doing things on the ground. And we already have those people. We have land care groups that are amazing. We have Queensland Trust for Nature. We have local government authorities that employ people to do these kinds of things. And so while we often think about manufacturing as the place where this happens, from my perspective, what a trend needs to be is a way to enable those folks who are actually out there doing things. I complain about pulling weeds out of my own veggie garden, let alone going out into 50 hectares of bush and doing it. And when we think about what habitat preservation means, it is not just stopping the trees from being chopped down, although of course that's very important. It's once they've been chopped down, how do we analyse revegetation? How do we make sure that the right vegetation is there? How do we ensure that invasive species aren't getting in? After the bushfires, the people I was talking to were saying there were animals on the ground that had been burned or, you know, they were otherwise very unhealthy. And frankly, there were predators just coming through and picking them off. So the idea about just finding the species we like and preserving them is not enough. We need to really put power in the hands of the people who are doing the things on the ground. So for us, the idea about collecting data, transforming it into knowledge and giving it back to people who are actually doing things is really important. So we know that citizen science has been very successful, and Kerrie's involvement in Virtual Reef Diver is a really good example of that. But we're looking at not just collecting data, but how to transform it into knowledge and give it back to people. We were very lucky to get some funding from the Landcare-led bushfire round, and we've created a conservation AI hub. It consists of a data portal. We work with Landcare and other groups. We ingest their data. We use leading edge AI algorithms, and we translate that into understandable knowledge so that we can give it back to them so that they can manage on the ground. There's a talented team, and I'll acknowledge here as well, Gavin Winter and the Visar team, who are really a huge part of making this, getting it up and running. So whether these are trends or not, I don't know, but I certainly would suggest that they're needs, and I'll leave it with you clever folk to see whether it can be done or not. Explainable, yes, but not just explainable, making it easier to use, easier to communicate and understand both what's going on in the algorithm and the products that come out of it. One of the things we often overlook is how to incorporate other forms of knowledge. So the knowledge from traditional owners, it might be farmers, it might be those folks who know their own backyard intimately, the forest that they work out and volunteer in. And we need to have ways, it can't just be, look, I love me a nerd, and we congregate in universities, but often it's the people who are really out in the community, actively engaged in this stuff, who frankly don't have time to upskill, to learn how to use these things. So we need to help them. We need to do it for them. And really that flows through to the last one. Easily accessible systems for managers at all levels, from the volunteers and Landcare groups to local government authorities, state government authorities, with management, and an effective fusion of data layers so they know how to manage better. And that's me. Thanks.
Oh, that's great, Grant. Thanks. I was so busy writing notes, I forgot that I have to moderate this. So thank you. That's great. Really inspiring work that you're doing, and a great way to see, you know, data science and AI really playing a big role in our world. So thank you. Our last panel member is Professor Richi Nayak from the QUT School of Computer Science. And so as Deputy Director of the Centre for Data Science, and as an internationally recognised expert in data mining, text mining and web intelligence, she's a perfect person to have the last word on a very real emerging trend in data science and AI in 2022, namely advances in text mining and its applications. Over to you, Richi.
Thanks, Kerrie, and thank you for attending. So, as we know, a lot of data that we see today appears actually in natural language processing form, in text form. A recent Gartner report suggests that 90% of data is actually unstructured, what we see in today's world, and a majority of them is text. So this text mining or natural language processing, as we know, NLP, is a subfield of AI or machine learning that deals with how to process data, how to understand the data and interpret it. You may be familiar with many applications that we use every day based on text, like autocorrelation, language translation, sentiment analysis, and so on. So the three trends that I see would be emerging from this text mining research, and I think Kerrie said something about language models, so that leads to us for building good text mining classifiers and focusing more on inclusive workforce, how can we make things more bias-free. So the first area that I'll speak in terms of bias and abuse detection. The second area that I see personalization and automation, and the third area is digitization for knowledge discovery. So bias and abuse detection, building a text classifier is nothing really new. We are doing it for many, many years. But what happens with the rise of social media and with the large openly expressive data, so this data contains a lot of bias in terms of race, age, ethnicity, and all other biases. So how could we really detect it autonomously? And because there is so much noise and language problems that appear in the social media data, addition to the contextual semanticness that they require, it becomes very hard to build this model. And this becomes really more of an issue, detecting the bias with the rise of very powerful transformer model like GPT-3. Many of you would have heard about it, that it has capability to generate text, and a lot of time that is fake text generation as well. And there was a recent report on Twitter and some other social media that they use this conversational chat engine, and actually the chat engine, the way it inferred, it actually encouraged the user to go for suicide. It becomes our responsibility in the text mining research to stop those kind of biases and things happening. And this has become quite infeasible because of language models. So language models usually build over 1 billion of documents that contain all kind of information, and then the semantic can be learned from that text. But as Alice and Grant were saying, that we should think about the environment. So these large language models are really not environmental friendly. There is a report that they produce more carbon emission than any other industry that would do. So there has been a lot of research trained how to really utilize this empower of language model, but in a way that it's a sustainable and also small organizations can use. So some of the trains are like progressive transfer learning. So rather than one large data sets, use multiple data sets that reduces bias, but at the same time, environmental friendliness as well. Some of our research we have developed, so in that way, like there is an app on Slack that is DOS. So as you type, it would actually pick the bias in the text. So if you like a job ad, if it types, I'm looking for a young secretary, it would put young and would immediately ask the originator to change it. So I guess this encourages this bias-free world. So that's where I see one of the ones. And yeah, as Bill said, that robotics automation, we have heard a lot, but I really insist that text-based process automation is also another trend that we are looking for many years to come now. So the problem is that data is dissipated throughout the internet, so many journals, gray articles, and so on. Now the text mining has capability to process that data, synthesize that data, and then appear in the application that we want. So for example, let's talk about a marketing strategist. They usually spend about 40 hours to propose a marketing strategy report. They would study the company that they are making the report for, its competitors, the information online, and all those kind of things. These are repetitively and onerous things. So text mining now can help to actually look for that information, build the models to find out whether this information is relevant to this particular task, and then based on some past sample reports, it can actually generate this report. So this is an example a robotic marketer that is based on this technology, and that has reduced it to 4 hours now. So that kind of process automation. Another example is the cotton sustainability report card. Again, like as Alice was preluding, there are many steps in that supply chain. So the sustainability managers would be looking for all those indicators and what are really effective points here. Again, the information is dissipated. We could actually gather that information, process it, and present it like that. And then the models have got adaptive capability, so they would do it. So that's what my second take of where we are going in terms of that. And the third one goes back to, like, we talk about that data is available, but a lot of time this data is archived or historical data. How can we really make use of that data? Especially almost every organization has got this kind of data where we have got large amounts of files. We might have OCR documents, very historical documents, but once we OCR them, scan them, they appear in this kind of form. How can we make them machine readable, indexed, processed? So we could have something like this dashboard where we could do this knowledge discovery, write a query. So for example, every state department of resources have been collecting reports on their oil and mineral extractions. And these reports goes back from 1920s. There is so much variations of these reports. Some of them are scannable, but not really machine readable. So how can we really make them readable? So now when a new miner comes into the field, they can find out what are the untapped mining resources in the field. So I guess this digitization of text data for knowledge discovery would be my third pick, where this trend is moving towards. So in summary, I would say that text mining has really tapped all the resources. Those were not really available and enabling us to do much more knowledge discovery.
Thank you so much, Richi. Well, it's, as I said, it's an exciting year coming up, given all of these trends that we've been discussing. And we turn now to a general discussion. And I see that there's some comments in the chat. I'm going to say that Michael Cowling is barred from making any other comments after his joke about, how much can a koala bear? So that's it for you, Michael. I'm sorry. But anybody else is welcome to make a comment in the chat. And if any of the speakers would like to pick up on any of those comments, then please feel free. But I'm going to start with just a couple of questions, and this is an open question to anyone who would like to pick it up. But there seems to be this tension we're really coming to this point where we have a lot of automation of our data science and AI tools, but we also then have this this human aspect of the decision making as well. So where do you think that at the end of this year will be with respect to how these two components sort of fit together? So how automated will our decision making be? And we've heard a lot about that from all of you. And how will the human fit into that? So I'm going to throw first to Will and then open it up.
Excellent, thank you. So often AI is looking at single objectives, so single decision making, and we work out whether we want to recycle something or not. The modern world is multi-objective. It's not just about one thing or the other. We've got to take into account what's going to happen with the product after you've recycled it. You want to take into account how do people feel about their clothes being recycled. And therefore, I think there's more of a trend for multi-objective decision making. And my feeling over the next 12 to 24 months is not going to be looking at how we make isolated decisions, which we can do really well at the moment, but how we start looking at multi-objective decision making. And that's where I see the trend going.
Okay, thanks, Will. Would anybody else like to comment on that?
If I say it from the technical point of it, whatever discovery we do it from the data mining or data science or machine learning techniques, we need to rely on to human for the validation. So human in loop really becomes very important to validate and verify the knowledge that we are getting from those techniques. For example, like we are doing a project with Oracle in terms of finding these cyber threats and the security related tweets. When we get them, we can get the methods that automatically identify them. But we need these experts and humans in a loop that the tools that we are developing are doing what they meant to be.
Okay, thanks, Richi. And I guess, Alice, from your perspective, you had a really nice question around this, didn't you? It was like, how does the technology really support the humans in this? Would you like to just expand briefly on that?
Thank you. Yeah, so it seems to me there's been so many unintended consequences from data science, as we'd all be aware. And I think Richi spoke to it well when she talked about the biases that can be inherent. And I'm sure that's something that's very front of mind to data scientists. So I suppose I always come back to what end are these technologies being deployed and what kinds of decisions are they seeking to decide on? So going back to the kind of core purpose of whatever the technology will be. And so often, at least in my industry in fashion, it's been in service to making a system faster and seemingly more efficient, but in service to profit first, rather than in service to, a world we can actually inhabit that's good for people. So I feel that it actually has to come down to a paradigm shift within how organizations and societies run, to then tell the machines to make the decisions that will meet that paradigm that we need. So I don't know if is that possible? Can you reprogram paradigms? That'd be nice to know.
Very challenging, very, very good. Grant.
I would just say the world is messy. And even in the way that we understand things, it evolves. So we might want to think about, multi-criteria objectives, for example. But actually being able to extract the knowledge from humans that has to do with how they make decisions, I think is very difficult. And so getting the experience of people, it might be traditional owners, or it might be people who have managed the land for a long time, to actually even embody it in a way that we can start to understand and therefore put it into a decision-making process is a real challenge. So talking about what the vehicle is, how to help make decisions, that's great. But we still are dealing with this, this thing at the beginning, which is realistically, how can we look at all of the varied experience and incorporate it into that vehicle?
Yeah, great perspective on it. I'm going to push on that a little harder and think about the issue of data literacy. So there's a lot of talk from the trends in data science and AI coming in, but I think all of you have touched on this. Like, we need to have the people ready to take these tools up and to use them. So how do you see this year, this sort of trend in data literacy and people becoming aware of what data they're giving over, what data they're consuming, how they're interpreting data, this kind of like data world that everybody lives in now, and also just touch on also the training that's required for that and how training is changing with respect to trying to address these issues of data literacy. And I'm going to push it back to you, Grant, to have the first talk about that.
Sure. So part of what we're doing is training people how to fly drones in an effective way to detect koalas, amongst other things. But that is probably even then not a broad scale solution. It's very labor intensive. It's very costly. And so that's a data perspective, which is how do I train people so that I can use their data? Of course, there is another perspective, which is how can I get to their level? I keep on thinking about iPhones, or, sorry, pick your brand. It doesn't have to be an iPhone. What they did was make things easily usable. And that's part of, I believe, what the paradigm needs to be. How do we get to people where they live? How do we produce it in a way that they will want to pick it up and use it and not have to train them to be what we want them to be.
Okay, perfect. Alice, tell us about training and data literacy in the fashion world.
It's hard to know where to begin, actually, because it is such a complex conundrum. And I think as individuals, we all know that we're sort of giving over so much data, and it's so opaque where it's going, and there's a real kind of as a layperson, it's just also unknown and quite alarming. I think so. I was reflecting as you asked the question on what I've seen from people I've spoken with industry, and recently I was touring a facility where I was so impressed by seeing how this small business had cobbled together all these different open access tools, whether it's a Google Sheet or a Trello board or whatever, and they built this entire kind of inventory management system from all these freely available tools. And they'd done this kind of analysis on what was going in and what was going out, and it's in an area that's has nothing behind it because it's quite an emerging area. And watching it, I thought how remarkable that because of this proliferation of open access tools, they were able to customize something for free on a shoestring that suited their needs and their company. So there's that side of it, which is, I think, only going to get more exciting, and we're going to see people really innovatively bring these sort of suites of tools together to work for them in their business. The other side of it I see is when I speak to large retailers who, are trying to go back through the supply chain, as I spoke to, and their challenges in terms of how do you even, how do you progress there? What tools do you employ, and what's the kind of risk that each of those presents, and how might you be locked into particular kind of, I don't know what the technical term for it, but a sort of a paywall, if you like, of proprietary software and that kind of thing. And then the third dimension is the small independent brand designer, the small independent designer who seeks to have oversight over all her supply chain. How does she do that without access to these big tools and the like? So yeah, I can see it's going to just be an emerging dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I opened the lid a little bit and like all of this came out. So it's going to be a really interesting answer. Thank you. Richi or Will, would you like to pick up on this?
Yeah, I'll pick up a couple of points. I think if AI works well, we'll just accept it. So electricity being an example, we just accept that electricity works. We go in the house, turn on light switch, light bulb. We don't really think about it. So I think as AI is doing the right thing for us, like telling us how to get to A to B on Google Maps, it will sit in our pocket and we won't even think about how it works. It's only when it goes wrong that we'll need the explainable AI, or when it's doing things that we don't like, that we want to start digging under the hood. I do think with these trends we've identified, there will be training centers and there will be the role for academics and industry to work together to upskill people to really take advantage of the cutting edge of AI. But for me, I can see the trend being more accepted on everyday life.
Okay, thanks, Will. Richi.
So of course, it varies from domain to domain, and where you are at supply chain model in terms of adaptability of the machine learning models. So some people that we come across, or some companies, they are really at high end of technology. They are quite opt for choosing machine learning technology and doing evolution with those models, predictive models or descriptive models. But then we have some of the heavy users of the technology, like in agriculture, at farmer level. We are talking about this digital twin, digital farms, but they are the end users there. And sometimes they don't even know what the data that they are generating. They are the owners of those digital farms, but where that data is going. So data literacy is really important, covering all aspects of this digital education, from how to use the data to ownership, ethics, to the extreme side of like operationalizing the models. How often do you really have to adopt those models to suit your situations and so on?
Yeah, thanks, Richi. So I can see that there's going to be over the year and into the future this sort of emergence of more literacy in data in the community and in businesses, and also then the demand for how we actually change our training and education to address that. I'm going to ask each of you now a final question. And that is going to be that I started the conversation about, 20 years ago, roughly, there was this comment about, AI is not going to go anywhere. And now, of course, we're seeing something very different in the world now. So that's 20 years ago. And we've talked now about the emerging trends for 2022. But I'd like for you to cast your mind 20 years into the future and to go, what do you see as one of the highlights of data science and AI in 20 years' time? So what will your area look like, or how will data science and AI be impacting on your area in 20 years' time? Now, none of you have had this question before. You haven't heard this. So I'm putting you completely on the spot here. Okay, which is completely unfair, I know, but I'm going to start with Richi.
I would say that in 20 or maybe in 10 years, data science would become a very ubiquitous technology like mobile. We don't really know what is happening. Electricity, we would just become the acceptable of that technology. That, yep, we generate the data is being analyzed, and then we live in the world where data-led decision-making is part of that. So I would imagine that we would be living in a very much automated world where most of the onerous tasks would be done by machines, and we would be doing some more intelligent tasks.
Okay, thanks, Richi. Will?
I believe continual learning will be happening in 20 years' time. So rather than just a robot learning one thing for one task and forgetting about it, or an AI looking at one piece of data and then just being so blinkered to that, AI will be able to look at one task, see how it compares to a different task, and keep learning and keep evolving. And I believe that will help it and happen on a federated level. So it won't just be Alice's robot learning how to fold towels. It will be Greg's AI looking at koalas and looking at, okay, how do I do texture manipulation and transferring that learning between the two AIs, so you continually learn and take analogies between each other at an abstract level. So that's where I see the trends in 20 years.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Grant?
I'll talk about a hope rather than perhaps a trend. I think 20 years is too long. I have absolutely no idea. In 10 years, I hope to see the landscape digitized. I hope that we can translate some of the messiness into data that we can visualize, that we can understand the connections, and do that at a continental scale. So at the moment, we have vast amounts of data we're collecting, for example, from satellites. But in the way that Will talked about, essentially these silos, what we need to be able to do is connect that and understand the levels and the layers within ecosystems to understand how they're impacting each other and how we can do better to not do so badly. And I think very much along the same way that, fundamentally, we need something as complex as machine learning to be able to help us with that.
Thank you. And last say, Alice.
Well, frankly, I think 20 years in the future, and I wonder what our climate and our weather will be like. I wonder what supply chains disruptions we'll be facing, what kinds of conflicts and challenges. And I would hope that data and AI will be used for, I guess, for monitoring the living world, for protecting it, for every product that we buy has its carbon footprint, has its metrics of where it goes and where it will be going next, where it came from, whose hand touched it, and how that person who made it can be fairly paid for their work. I would hope that the technology, the infrastructure that powers all this technology is solely clean energy. And yeah, we'll all live in hope.
What a great future. Thank you very much. Well, unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our session for our Data Science in the News webinar. Thank you to all 4 panellists very much. Professor Will Browne, Associate Professor Alice Payne, Associate Professor Grant Hamilton, and Professor Richi Nayak. Many thanks also to Becky Cook and Tim McCougar from the QUT Centre for Data Science for all their help in organising and promoting the Data Science in the News webinar series, and to the Queensland Academy of the Arts and Sciences, our partner in this enterprise for the Data Science in the News webinar. Our next webinar will be on the 1st of April, Friday the 1st of April at 12 to 1 p.m. Queensland time, and it'll be led by our partners, the Queensland Academy of the Arts and Sciences, and the focus will be on digital citizenship in the post-COVID world. So I hope you can join us for that. And I want to thank you, our audience. Thank you for your comments and for attending this session. I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And from the Centre for Data Science, take care, everyone, and bye for now.